The US and China have agreed to significantly decrease tariffs on goods being sold between the two economies after a successful round of talks which took place in Switzerland over the weekend. Well, following several rounds of tariffs issued by the White House, levies on Chinese imports into the US reached 245%, while retaliation from Beijing took their tariff rate on imports from America up to 125%. Well, in today's breakthrough, both sides agreed to lower levies by 115% for a 90-day period as negotiations continue on. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said both sides saw the need for trade between the two powers to continue.
The consensus from both delegations this weekend is neither side wants a decoupling. And what had occurred with these very high tariffs, as Ambassador Greer said, was the equivalent of an embargo, and neither side wants that. We do want trade. We want more balanced trade, and I think that both sides are committed to achieving that. We would like to see China open to more U.S. goods. We expect that as the negotiations proceed, that there will also be a possibility of purchase agreements to pull what is our largest bilateral trade deficit into balance. That has gotten out of balance, and much of this has happened through neglect over the past 4 years, as the previous administration did not engage on this issue.
Scott Bessent there. Well, let's get some analysis from our China correspondent, Laura Bicker. Good to talk to you, Laura. For a long time, China seemed to be digging its heels in. Why do you think they ended up coming to the table in this way and agreeing to these cuts?
Well, you're right. China has been defiant from the start. It has retaliated to every US move with levies of its own. It has pledged not to back down. And I've been travelling across the country. I've met with factory owners. I've met with factory workers. I've met with traders. Many of them agreed with that stance and said, defiantly that they too would fight until the end. However, behind the scenes and behind the rhetoric, it seems that officials are growing increasingly concerned about the impact these tariffs might have on the Chinese economy, an economy that's already struggling to deal with the likes of a property crisis and very high youth unemployment. So there was a concern that these tariffs would have an extra impact. Officials in Beijing are also worried that as many countries rush to Washington to do their own trade deals, they're worried about the threat that Donald Trump has issued, that perhaps when they're doing these deals, they're going to be persuaded to cut China out of the global supply chain picture. Now, that's something that Beijing does not want. So it does seem that when the US has initiated these talks, as China claims it did, that China has responded. They talked for about 7 hours on Saturday, several hours on Sunday. So the talks were, as you heard there from the US Treasury Secretary, robust. And it does seem that they have managed to come to an agreement. And that wasn't something that any of us were expecting. We'd heard from analysts that expectations for these talks were low. So the fact that they have managed to come to an agreement is a surprise to many. It will be suspended, these tariffs will be suspended for the next 90 days while more talks take place. I think getting hold of a wider trade deal between these two countries, between these two leading economic countries, might be more difficult.
And Laura, you talk about the economics there, but there's a lot of politics involved in this too. Where do you think this leaves the often fraught relationship between China and the US?
I think we'll have to see how the talks go between the next 90 days. I think I'm surprised by how positive the tone is in both statements, both from the United States end and the Chinese end. It is a very, very positive statement that's been issued by the Commerce Ministry. However, there's a little, just a wee sting in the tail at the end, where the Commerce Ministry said it looks forward to working with the United States in these talks and basically looking at who has been in the wrong, and they blame the United States for putting these levies eyes on China. So it's just a reminder of where Beijing stands. Beijing believes that the United States is in the wrong for imposing these tariffs. However, the US believes that China basically sells too much stuff to the United States. It wants a balance in trade. So finding that balance between Beijing and Washington will be the difficulty over these 90 days. But I have to say, many of us have been surprised by the positive outcome just after 2 days of talks.
Always great to have you on. Thank you very much. Our China correspondent, Laura Bicker.